Okay, so in this video I'm going to be changing the spark plugs on Peugeot 208. So step one, there's 3 bolts holding in the ignition coils or coil packs, whatever you want to call them. They're very loosely nipped up, so it's quite easy to get them undone with a small ratchet and socket. I think they're 8mm, these bolt heads. So you'll want an 8mm socket, and I'm just removing the last one there. So these are the only things holding the ignition coils in place. So once you remove those bolts, the next thing you're going to want to do is remove the little connectors, the electric connectors. They're just a simple push-in electric connector. You get them on a lot of Peugeots and Citroens. You just push in both sides of the connector and push it backwards. And here I'm trying to just work out how to get the ignition coil out. They basically pull out. Nothing more complicated than that. And I'm just cleaning off the coils there because there's a bit of dirt all around them. You don't really want too much dirt getting into the holes where the spark plugs live. So again, they all just pull out fairly easily. You don't need to tug too hard. If you do, something's probably not disconnected or stopping it from coming out. You don't really want to break any of these components. So then the next step is to loosen the actual spark plugs themselves. You'll need an extension to do this and a spark plug socket of the correct size. The easiest way to check you've got the correct size is measure it up against the the new spark plugs that you just bought to go in. And again, quite simple, you just loosen them off, and once I got past a certain point, to make it quicker, I just took the torque wrench off and just unscrewed the extension bar, because it's nice and loose. These things shouldn't be torqued up very hard at all. So okay, that's one of the plugs out. And when I was inspecting those plugs, they did look quite badly fouled, to be honest. So I suspect either they hadn't been changed in the last service, or possibly it's just the case that these things are supposed to go for tens of thousands of miles, but maybe they don't actually last as long as the manufacturers state. So you're going to want to torque up these spark plugs. I'm not sure of the exact figures. I think it's something in the region of sort of 28-30 Newton meters of force, which is really not a lot. So certainly with a torque wrench. But yeah, just torque it up. Don't over tighten them. There really is no point over tightening them. You're just going to strip the threads, and that's a complete nightmare. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually just trying to get the socket out of the spark plug hole. Basically, the extension bar's come off, the socket's still attached to the spark plug. It's not a big deal. First time it happens to you, you might panic a bit and think, how am I going to deal with this? But just get a pair of pliers and just pull the socket out of the spark plug hole. It's not too much of a problem. And I'm just applying a little bit of WD-40 to the threads of the bolts that go back in, just to help them undo next time. But again, they don't need to be done very tight, so they should be really easy to get undone. So that's one spark plug done, and the ignition coil's back in, and it's basically just a simple process to do the same with the other 2 holes. if you mix up the order of the ignition coils when you take them out, I don't think it matters. I think they're all interchangeable, but I did kind of keep them in order. So here we go, just loosening off the second spark plug. So installing the second spark plug here. So the camera angle's not the best. You sometimes get a good view of my head here, but you can hopefully see exactly what I'm doing and where I'm doing it. It is such an easy job. You know, if you've got the tools, it kind of really makes sense to do it yourself. Again, I think I might have lost the socket down in there, so yeah, just pulling it out with a pair of pliers again, no big deal. Second ignition coils back in, connecting the electrical connector, and then just I'm going to put the bolt back in. When you take these bolts out, just make sure you put them somewhere safe so you're not going to lose them. Just tightening up by hand really. I'm not going to tighten them until they're all back in place. So here we go, loosening the third spark plug. It's a little more tricky. There's a kind of hose or pipe, I can't remember what it is, going into the I guess that's the inlet manifold. But you can easily work there with that in place. You don't need to disconnect that necessarily. And that's one of the nice things about this engine. It's actually pretty easy to work on. There's no sort of pointless plastic covers in the way of getting to these components. So I actually found it really easy to work on. I've not done this job before on this car. I'm just kind of figuring it out as I go along, really. These plugs, they're quite expensive actually on this this vehicle. I don't know if you can get a cheaper set, but really the only ones that I could find were I think the brand's NGK, and there's some sort of special plugs which cost, the cheapest I think I could find them was around about £15 per plug, I think, if I recall correctly. And so they are supposed to last a while, but they are quite pricey compared to other spark plugs. But then hey, you've only got 3 to replace, and it's definitely a job worth doing. You don't want to skimp out on this. Eventually you'll get ignition problems if you go too long before changing them. So it's worth doing. The ignition coils themselves tend not to need replacing very often at all. I'm just cleaning up the last one there with a rag. There's a bit of dirt on it, but yeah, they tend to last a while. They can break down, those ignition coils, or coil packs as some people call them, but they look pretty substantial, to be honest, and they don't tend to go wrong all that often, but they can do. So something to bear in mind, and a very simple component to replace if you need to, but you probably want to make sure that it actually needs replacing, because I think they're pretty pricey. I mean, nothing's massively expensive on this engine. The basic sort of service components and things. Okay, so this next step is doing the air filter. Again, another really simple job. I'd not done it before in this model, so I'm sort of trying to figure it out. What I actually start doing is undoing these screws, which are all around the air filter housing, which you can do with it in place, but it's a bit of a challenge, and it's actually a lot easier to remove the whole air filter box. So I'm trying to remove this screw, and actually it's a posi drive, I think PZ2, sort of middle size one, and I'm slightly stripping the threads here, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Basically, this is a good lesson in terms of putting the right things back in the right place, because it was actually a Phillips head screw bit that I was using, and not a posi drive one that was put back in the wrong place. So pretty soon, after a while sort of struggling, I figure out that I've got the wrong one, and I managed not to completely strip the threads. So once I got the right bit, there we go, picking up the right bit, it's actually relatively easy to free it off eventually. Yeah, I think that's the one. So I'm going to go through and do some of those screws, and then I realised that actually it's a lot easier to gain access to the other ones by taking the air filter box off completely, and I'll point out where you do that. But basically there's just a few things to do, so I'm on to the next screw there. So to remove the actual air filter box, there's just one bolt, which is like a silver bolt, which you'll see I'll take apart in a second. It's sort of in the centre almost of the shot there, right towards the bulkhead, the firewall of the vehicle. And once you undo that bolt, then there's the little vacuum hose you can see that's coming through to the throttle body, which is just to kind of push in and remove sort of clip jobby, and then there's a hose clip and just a push-in clip that disconnects the pipe, the air intake pipe. But I'm still doing the screws at this stage, still sort of persevering getting those undone. But as I say, they're a lot easier to do once the air filter housing is off of the vehicle. So this is not a bad little tip. What I'm using there is a universal joint, which makes it easier to get into tight spaces with a ratchet and a socket or a screw bit, and that's very useful in some situations. In this situation it's not really necessary, as I sort of find out shortly, but it's pretty much the only way to get at some really hard to reach bolts. But the problem is, obviously, you only have so much room to manoeuvre, so it takes a lot longer in that situation. And it can be quite frustrating. You can get quite fatigued as well doing that. So it's only really recommended if you can't get to it in any other way. And I think before long, once I get this one out, I might realise that persevering this way is not the way to go. And in any case, I think you have to take that silver bolt out to get the top of the housing off anyway, and remove the hose clip. And it's so I think in fact the only way. Here we go. Surely this guy can figure it out now. Yeah, so I think now I'm going to try the bolt. Here we go. So this is, I think, a 9 or 10 millimeter, probably 10 millimeter bolt. So it just needs a 10 millimeter socket. comes out dead easy. Again, it's not torqued up tight or anything. This is really the only main thing retaining the whole filter housing in. It kind of goes all sort of floppy at the back once you've undone that. And then you've got, so I'm kind of trying to figure out what's going on. You've got that vacuum hose, and you've got the Jubilee sort of hose clip that's holding the air filter housing to the kind of throttle body, I guess. So that's just a nice simple flat bladed screw to loosen that off. And then you just sort of give it a bit of a tug to pull it off. So it's come loose now. Now I'm trying to work out how to get this pipe off. Again, just a simple pushing clip, push in both sides and pull it out. That simple. And then the only thing remaining is this little vacuum hose clip, which can be a bit of a fiddly job, but I think it's just a case of in the end I figured out you just have to pull the you have to push in the clip and pull the hose out. So you'll see me kind of figure that out in a second, try various things, but I think it's just a fiddly little clip. Probably didn't help that I was wearing gloves at the time. So it's nearly off now. I'm just sort of trying to maneuver it off. Again, sometimes these things can get a little bit stuck just from where they've been kind of on the car for a while. So you might need a little bit of force, but in actual fact, you don't need a lot. And yeah, if you find yourself trying to tug on anything like that too hard, then you're probably just going to break it. So there we go. That's the air filter housing off. So the next step really is just to remove the rest of those posi drive screws. It's dead simple. And then once you've got it open, I don't think I actually show this in the video, but you just literally lift the paper element out and then put a new one in. You can get some cheap paper elements replacements very easy. And then you just they're nice and cheap. You can get other types. So I'm actually trying a K&N air filter here, which is supposed to increase the airflow a little bit. And nice thing about them is you can actually supposedly wash and reuse them. So I'm going to give that a go. It's might save on money in the long term, a bit more environmentally friendly perhaps. Might increase the performance of the car, but I doubt it's going to be noticeable. So all I'm doing here is just tightening. I think I'm tightening the screws back up. I think I've already got the new air filter in there. I'm just kind of trying to show the process of doing that. So yeah, and reinstalling the air filter housing. So yeah, literally the element just lifts out once you've got the two sections of it apart. So it's not hard to replace at all. And then yeah, reconnecting it is just a case of putting that pipe back on, putting the little vacuum hose back on, getting that silver sort of 10mm bolt, a bit of WD-40 on that to keep the thread nice and easy. Just nip it up by hand and then use a ratchet and just just tight, not you don't have to sort of torque those ones up to the specific torque rating really. So the only thing I've forgotten to do here is tighten up that hose clip, and I actually didn't realise until I'd finished the job. But yeah, that's the whole complete process of doing the 3 spark plugs and the air filter. It's very easy, simple to do at home. Yeah, once you're done, just give the car a start up, make sure it's running okay before you try and take it on a long journey, and there you go, you're good to go.